Before the first cities of Mesopotamia, before Egypt, before the Maya, there was another civilization right here in North America. A civilization modern science still refuses to acknowledge. They built perfect geometric mounds aligned to the stars, used advanced copper mining techniques, and left behind structures more ancient than history itself. Today we uncover the world that existed in America, before America, and the lost builders who shaped it. Long before North America became the landscape we recognize today, long before highways carved across the plains or skyscrapers shadowed the coasts, the continent was a silent cradle of forgotten civilizations. When most people think of ancient history, they imagine Mesopotamia, Egypt, or the Indus Valley. They picture pyramids rising from deserts, ziggurats climbing toward stars, and stone temples weathered by millennia. But few ever ask the forbidden question. What if the first chapters of human civilization were written here, in the heart of North America, long before the rest of the world began keeping records? Hidden beneath forests, rivers, farmlands, and quiet suburban neighborhoods lies a layer of earth that stores stories older than writing. A continent-wide network of geometric earthworks, buried causeways, ancient alignments, and abandoned ceremonial complexes still stretches from the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico. Thousands of mounds once dotted this land, some small as a hill, others towering like forgotten pyramids, yet their builders left no written language, no carved stone kings, no monuments shouting their names to the future. All that remains are shapes in the ground, patterns too perfect to be accidents, and alignments too precise to be primitive. Archaeologists long dismissed these structures as the work of simple tribes, created without advanced knowledge or planning. But as new technology like LiDAR strips away centuries of soil and vegetation, an uncomfortable truth emerges. These ancient engineers understood astronomy, geometry, and surveying at a level that challenges everything we thought we knew. In the Mississippi River Valley, we find earthworks stretching miles across open plains, aligned to the movements of the sun and moon with uncanny precision. Across the Ohio Valley, perfect circles and squares carved into the land are so large that their true shapes can only be seen from the sky. Yet they were built by societies with no written mathematics. Near the Great Lakes, thousands of ancient copper mines scar the landscape, evidence of massive extraction efforts dating back thousands of years before recorded history. No one knows where all that copper went. No one knows who organized the workforce, and no one knows why the activity suddenly stopped. From Wisconsin to Georgia, we find patterns, cultural fingerprints, suggesting a level of continental connection we have never credited to the early people of North America. These builders did not leave stone temples, but they shaped the land itself into monuments. They carved symbols across entire regions, forming a language of geometry that modern academia still struggles to interpret. Their cities were not made of stone, but of earth, soft to the elements, easily erased by time, but unmistakably intentional. To understand what was truly here before us, we must look beneath the comfortable stories taught in school. We must search the soil, the rivers, the forgotten fields, and the sky above them. Because only then do we realize that North America was not an empty wilderness waiting for discovery. It was a world alive with knowledge, complexity, and purpose. A world built by people whose names we will never know, yet whose creations still whisper from beneath the ground. The continent itself becomes the evidence. Vast geometric formations too large to comprehend from the surface, requiring advanced planning and coordinated labor. A civilization, perhaps several, existed here long before historians were ready to accept, and they left clues scattered everywhere, hiding in plain sight. But to trace the origins of these lost builders, we must travel deeper into the land, to the site that changed everything. A site older, larger and more complex than any city in North America's recorded past, a place that reveals this continent's forgotten story. As archaeologists began piecing together fragments of North America's hidden past, a pattern gradually emerged, one that pointed not to scattered tribes acting independently, but to a network of ancient cultures sharing knowledge across astonishing distances. Long before the rise of Cahokia, or the intricate ceremonial centers of the Mississippi Valley, there were people who understood the land at a scale that feels almost modern. Their constructions were not random mounds or primitive piles of soil. They were deliberate, engineered, and aligned with celestial cycles that span years, decades, and even centuries. These were cultures that planned not for seasons, but for generations. In the Ohio Valley, researchers found that the angles of earthworks correspond to lunar standstill cycles that repeat only every 18.6 years. To create such alignments, generations of skywatchers would have needed to track the moon with near obsession, handing complex observational knowledge from elders to apprentices across lifetimes. Farther south, in Georgia and Alabama, ancient complexes show similar precision: circles, squares, and parallel walls laid out as if someone had folded geometry into the soil itself. None of this resembled the simplistic image of early North American societies that modern textbooks portrayed. Instead, it revealed an underlying structure, a purposeful architecture stretching from one culture to the next. But the greatest revelation came not from the shapes of the earthworks, but from what lay beneath them. Excavations uncovered layers of soil that revealed repeated construction, rebuilding, and expansion over long periods of time. These weren't temporary settlements or ceremonial spots used for a single generation. They were centers of enduring importance, places where people returned for reasons we still don't fully understand. Some sites showed evidence of controlled burns, terracing, and soil engineering techniques previously believed to be absent from pre-Columbian North America. Others contained artifacts of marine shells from the Gulf Coast, copper from the Great Lakes, obsidian from the West, and mica from the Appalachian Mountains. This complex web of materials indicated something profound. Long-distance trade networks spanning half a continent existed thousands of years before European contact. It suggested a level of communication and movement that most historians never expected. Yet the most striking discovery remained the uniformity of design across regions separated by thousands of miles. Whether one looks at the Great Lakes area, the Ohio Valley, or the Southeast, certain symbols, shapes, and alignments appear repeatedly. It is as if these ancient people shared not just a trade network, but an intellectual framework, an inherited blueprint for building their world. New LiDAR scans strengthened this idea even further. When planes scanned over dense forests and rolling hills, the images that emerged revealed massive, interconnected complexes that had been completely swallowed by nature. Entire cities, geometric, ordered, and unmistakably human, lie buried beneath centuries of vegetation. Their size rivals some of the earliest urban centers in the Old World. The question no longer became, did a civilization exist here, but rather, how many did we lose to time? What force erased them so thoroughly that only their shapes remain? Climate shifts? Disease? Migration? Or something deeper? Something catastrophic? As these mysteries mounted, a new understanding took hold among those willing to question long-standing assumptions. North America was not a blank slate awaiting discovery. It was a continent shaped, engineered, and mapped by people we have barely begun to understand. And yet, all of these clues, earthworks, geometry, LiDAR scans, and ancient trade still pale in comparison to the revelation that awaits in the heart of the continent. Because beyond these scattered hints lies one place that changes everything. one site that stands as undeniable proof that North America was once home to a thriving, complex, and monumental civilization. A site so vast, so precise, and so advanced for its time that it forces us to reconsider the entire timeline of human history on this continent. That place is Cahokia, and its secrets would rewrite the story of America before America. To understand the magnitude of Cahokia, one must first erase the modern image of the American Midwest as quiet farmland and open plains. More than 1,000 years ago, this region pulsed with life. Where rows of corn now stand, there were once grand plazas, ceremonial avenues, wooden sanctuaries, bustling marketplaces, and massive earth structures rising above the treetops. Cahokia was not simply a settlement, it was a metropolis in every sense of the word. At its height, it spread across an area larger than many medieval European cities. While London struggled to reach a population of 15,000, Cahokia soared beyond 20,000 residents, with tens of thousands more living in satellite towns connected through trade and pilgrimage routes. The city thrived between roughly 1050 and 1350 AD, a period historians now call the Cahokian Florescence, when art, engineering, and ceremonial life flourished at a scale unseen anywhere else north of Mexico. Dominating this landscape was Monk's Mound, a colossal earthen pyramid that remains the largest structure of its kind in North America. Standing 10 stories high and covering more ground than the Great Pyramid of Giza, it demanded millions of individual baskets of earth carried and compacted by hand. Each layer was engineered with surprising sophistication. Builders mixed different types of soil, some chosen for their ability to repel water, others for strength and stability. Even today, archaeologists marvel that such a massive structure has resisted collapse for nearly a millennium. The mound was surrounded by plazas the size of several football fields, where gatherings, ceremonies, and markets once brought together people from distant regions. Around these plazas rose dozens of smaller mounds, platforms for leaders, temples, council houses, and perhaps astronomical observatories. Cahokia's layout, far from random, was carefully oriented to the cardinal directions. The city functioned not only as a political and economic center, but also as a cosmological one, aligning human life with celestial cycles. What makes Cahokia even more extraordinary is the cultural transformation that occurred almost overnight. Before 1050 AD, the region hosted smaller villages and scattered farming communities. But within the span of a single generation, the population surged, new social classes emerged, and monumental construction began at an unprecedented scale. Archaeologists describe it as an instant city, rising with a speed that defies traditional models of gradual cultural evolution. This rapid expansion implies either a sudden unification of people under a powerful leadership or the influx of ideas, beliefs, and technologies from outside regions, or perhaps both. For decades, scholars debated what triggered this transformation, but no consensus has emerged. Some suggest environmental abundance created the conditions for growth. Others point to religious movements or a charismatic leader who rallied the population into action. Yet Cahokia's sophistication hints at deeper cultural roots, inherited knowledge, or influences that remain unaccounted for in mainstream historical narratives. Artifacts recovered from the site paint a vivid picture of Cahokia's cosmopolitan nature. Shell beads from the Gulf Coast, copper from the Great Lakes, mica from the Appalachians, obsidian from the Rocky Mountains, all found their way into Cahokian workshops. These materials reveal a network of trade spanning thousands of miles, suggesting that Cahokia was not an isolated phenomenon, but part of a larger cultural world. Skilled artisans crafted intricate stone tools, engravings, figurines, and copper ornaments that reflected shared symbols and myths. Their iconography points to a belief system that connected the natural world, the sky above, and the underworld below.
At the heart of this system lay a deep understanding of astronomy, a knowledge that would become even more apparent as we move deeper into Cahokia's most mysterious structure, a wooden circle scholars call Woodhenge. At the western edge of Cahokia's Grand Plaza once stood a monument that few could fully appreciate from ground level, a massive wooden calendar now known as Woodhenge. To the casual observer, it might have looked like nothing more than a ring of evenly spaced posts, each carved from the trunk of a red cedar tree and planted deep into the earth. But when viewed from above, or reconstructed based on archaeological findings, it becomes clear that Woodhenge functioned as a precise solar observatory, rivaling the purpose and accuracy of ancient stone circles found across Europe. From the central viewing point, priests, or sky watchers, could track the rising sun as it moved along the horizon throughout the year. At the summer solstice, the sun would rise exactly behind one designated pole. At the winter solstice, behind another. These alignments were not accidental. They were designed with the same astronomical intention seen in civilizations far older and geographically distant. The existence of Woodhenge challenges long-standing misconceptions about North America's ancient cultures. It reveals a complex understanding of the sun's cycles, the changing seasons, and the natural rhythms that governed both agriculture and ritual life. And yet, Woodhenge was only one piece of a larger system. Cahokia's entire layout, including its mounds, plazas, and residential districts, reflected cosmological principles consistent with a worldview that connected earth, sky, and spirit. The city's planners oriented structures along cardinal directions, with symbolic pathways linking important ceremonial sites. Archaeologists have identified repeating patterns that suggest the city was divided into sacred zones, each representing different aspects of the universe, a concept seen in Mesoamerican and Andean societies, but seldom attributed to North America's prehistoric cultures. These observations leave researchers with two competing interpretations. Either Cahokia developed these ideas independently, or they inherited them from a much older cultural tradition long since lost to time. When Woodhenge was first discovered in the 1960s, its significance was underestimated. But as excavations continued, archaeologists uncovered multiple versions of the structure, rebuilt over centuries. This meant that Cahokia's astronomical practices evolved through generations of observation, refinement, and cultural importance. Rebuilding such a monumental calendar suggests an enduring tradition, one passed down carefully with knowledge preserved through ritual rather than writing. The precision required to calibrate these alignments speaks to a society that valued the movements of the heavens, not just for practical reasons like planting crops, but for ceremonial and spiritual purposes. In many indigenous traditions across the continent, the sky is seen as a living, guiding force. Cahokia's engineering reflects that worldview with breathtaking clarity. Yet despite its grandeur, Cahokia's rise was as mysterious as its fall. Around the mid-1300s, the city experienced a sudden decline. Population numbers dropped, construction halted, and the once thriving metropolis began to empty out. Environmental stress, flooding, political upheaval. Scholars propose many theories, but none fully explain the rapid abandonment of such a sophisticated center. What makes Cahokia truly enigmatic, however, is that its rise was equally sudden. For an entire civilization to appear, flourish, and vanish within a few centuries suggests that it was not an isolated anomaly. It may have been the successor to older traditions, older knowledge, and perhaps older cultures that prepared the foundation for Cahokia's astronomical and engineering feats. And this realization pushes us toward a deeper mystery. Who, then, were the cultural ancestors of the mound builders? Where did the ideas, the geometry, the alignments, the ceremonial systems come from before Cahokia ever existed? The answer, or perhaps the first clue, lies not in Cahokia at all, but in a much older culture whose monuments stretch across the Ohio Valley. Because long before Cahokia rose to prominence, the Adena people carved their own legacy into the earth, and their story contains some of the most puzzling clues of all. Long before Cahokia reshaped the Mississippi Valley, another culture quietly laid the foundations of monumental building in North America. These were the Adena, a people shrouded in mystery, emerging more than 2,500 years ago in the rolling landscapes of the Ohio Valley. Unlike Cahokia, the Adena left no grand cities, no sprawling plazas, and no colossal earthen pyramids towering above the countryside. Instead, they left mounds, hundreds of them, rising gently from the earth like silent markers of a vanished world. To the untrained eye, these mounds appear simple, almost humble. But beneath their soft contours lie some of the most enigmatic archaeological discoveries in the ancient Americas. The Adena did not build at the scale Cahokia eventually achieved, yet their work reveals a mastery of symbolism, geometry, and ritual practice that seems far ahead of its time. It is as if the Adena were custodians of an older tradition, one passed down through generations long before history began to keep its own record. The Adena mounds were not merely burial sites. They were living monuments, constructed layer by layer, often expanded across multiple generations. Each addition of soil marked not only a burial or ceremony, but a continuation of a spiritual connection to the past. Excavations have shown that Adena builders selected soil types deliberately, darker layers alternating with lighter ones, patterns resembling the rings of a tree displaying the life of a community. Within these mounds, archaeologists uncovered remains adorned with extraordinary artifacts, finely crafted pipes, engraved tablets, delicate copper bracelets, mica cut into sophisticated shapes, and beads made from shells sourced hundreds of miles away. The artistry is refined, intentional, and symbolic. Everything points to a culture deeply engaged with ritual, cosmology, and an understanding of death as a journey requiring elaborate preparation. Yet the Adena remain fundamentally elusive. They did not write. They left no inscriptions, no recorded stories, and no clear explanation of their beliefs or origins. Their identity rests entirely on what they crafted and what they buried. One of the most provocative aspects of the Adena legacy is the unusual physical traits associated with some of their burials. Reports from early excavations, largely in the 1800s and early 1900s, describe individuals of unusual height or proportions, including elongated skulls and robust skeletal structures. Modern archaeologists caution against exaggeration, emphasizing that many early reports lacked scientific rigor. Still, the recurring descriptions leave behind a lingering mystery. Were these traits symbolic modifications, genetic variations, or signs of a lineage distinct from surrounding groups? While no credible evidence supports sensational claims, the pattern of unique physical attributes in some Adena remains continues to raise questions about how they viewed identity, prestige, and status. The Adena also constructed some of the earliest known circular enclosures in North America. These were vast rings of earth, carefully shaped and often aligned with important celestial events. Their purpose remains open to interpretation. Some archaeologists believe they functioned as ceremonial grounds, gathering points for rituals and community events. Others propose they were observation sites for tracking the movements of the sun and moon, early markers of the astronomical knowledge that would later flourish in the Hopewell culture. Whatever their function, these circles reveal that the Adena had begun to weave geometry into their spiritual and social life. They were not improvising. They were following patterns, traditions, and perhaps larger cosmological principles inherited from an even earlier source. Even more intriguing is the Adena's trade network. Artifacts found at their sites contain materials from far beyond the Ohio Valley,
shells from the southeast, copper from the Great Lakes,
obsidian from the west. This wide distribution implies a far-reaching cultural influence, one that connected distant regions long before roads, writing systems, or centralized states emerged on the continent. It suggests that the Adena were not isolated but part of a broader web of societies sharing ideas, technologies, and sacred objects. Their reach echoes across time, setting the stage for a future where these connections would become even more pronounced. But for all the Adena achieved, their most lasting impact may not lie in their artifacts or their mounds, but in the cultural legacy they passed on. After centuries of influence, their traditions did not vanish, they evolved. And from this evolution emerged a new culture, one even more skilled in geometry, astronomy, and monumental construction. A culture that would expand upon the Adena blueprint and reshape the ancient landscape of North America with astonishing precision. This culture would become known as the Hopewell, and in their earthworks lies some of the greatest enigmas ever built on this continent. As the Adena people continued to shape the landscape over centuries, their influence began to radiate far beyond the Ohio Valley. Archaeologists studying site after site noticed a gradual shift. Mounds grew more elaborate, grave goods became more diverse, and geometric earthworks expanded in both scale and sophistication. It was not a sudden transformation, but a slow and steady evolution, the kind that unfolds when knowledge is passed across generations. The Adena were not disappearing. They were becoming something else. This transition, subtle yet powerful, gave rise to one of the most extraordinary cultures in ancient North America, the Hopewell. But to understand how the Adena paved the way for the Hopewell, we must look deeper into the rituals, symbols, and ideas that shaped both societies. Adena ceremonial life was deeply intertwined with the landscape. Their burial mounds were layered with meaning, not only marking individuals of status, but also preserving connections to ancestral memory. Each mound was a monument to continuity, a physical manifestation of heritage. The Adena used sacred spaces repeatedly, returning generation after generation to honor their dead and reinforce social bonds. This tradition of ritual continuity laid the groundwork for the vast ceremonial complexes that the Hopewell would later construct. But the Adena contributed more than just architecture. Their artistic style, abstract, spiritual, and often focused on the natural world, provided symbolic foundations for the elaborate imagery found in Hopewell art. Even their distinctive pipes, carved from stone into intricate shapes, foreshadowed the master craftsmanship that would flourish in the centuries to come. One of the most compelling aspects of the Adena legacy lies in their relationship with the sky. Their circular earthworks, though modest compared to later constructions, suggest an early understanding of celestial movements. Some researchers believe these circles were used to track solstices or mark seasonal transitions, reflecting a worldview where the heavens held spiritual significance. If so, the Adena were among the first on the continent to integrate astronomical knowledge into ceremonial architecture, a tradition that the Hopewell would elevate to unprecedented levels. The alignment patterns seen in Adena sites foreshadow the geometric precision of the Hopewell octagons, squares, and circles, structures so vast and accurate that they continue to astonish modern scholars. Trade was another crucial thread connecting the Adena to their successors. The long-distance exchange networks established by Adena communities allowed not only materials, but also ideas to flow across great distances. Copper from the Great Lakes, shells from the Gulf Coast, and minerals from the Appalachian Mountains all found their way to Adena sites. These networks became even more extensive under the Hopewell, who transformed trade into a continent-wide cultural exchange. This continuity suggests that the Adena did not simply vanish. Their ideas expanded outward, carried by new generations who used inherited knowledge to create a larger, more interconnected world. But the Adena mystery deepens when we consider the abruptness with which their distinct cultural markers fade from the archaeological record.
Around 100 BC, as Hopewell traditions began to dominate the landscape, Edina-style mounds diminished. Their art forms evolved. Their architectural signatures blended into broader regional styles. Some archaeologists see this as evidence of cultural absorption. Others view it as transformation from within. Regardless of interpretation, one fact remains clear. The Edina were the seed from which much of eastern North America's monumental tradition grew. Their legacy is not one of disappearance, but of metamorphosis. Still, unanswered questions linger. Where did the Edina's core ideas originate? Who taught them the symbolic geometry seen in their early enclosures? What compelled them to create monumental structures that required coordination, planning, and devotion? And how did these traditions survive long enough to be inherited, expanded, and perfected by the Hopewell? The more we search, the more it becomes clear that the Edina were not a beginning, but an echo of something older, deeper, and perhaps forgotten. Because when the Edina transitioned into the Hopewell tradition, monumental architecture did not just continue. It evolved into forms so precise, so vast, and so mathematically advanced that they challenge our understanding of prehistoric engineering. And within these Hopewell earthworks lies a mystery even greater than the Edina's, a geometric enigma that stretches across the land like the blueprint of an unknown civilization. When the Hopewell tradition emerged around 100 BC, it carried forward many ideas from the Edina. But instead of preserving those traditions, the Hopewell expanded them into something far more complex, something that transformed the landscape of ancient North America into a giant canvas of geometry and celestial meaning. The Hopewell did not build cities like Cahokia. They did not construct towering temples or fortifications. Instead, they engineered vast ceremonial earthworks that stretched for miles, shaping the land into circles, squares, and octagons so precise that their true design can only be appreciated from the air. This level of accuracy presents an immediate mystery. How did a culture with no written mathematics, no advanced tools, and no aerial perspective create earthworks rivaling the geometrical sophistication of any ancient society? Across Ohio and its neighboring regions, their monumental designs form a network unlike anything else in North America. The Newark earthworks, for instance, include a massive circle nearly 4 football fields across, an octagon aligned with uncanny precision, and processional pathways connecting them in straight lines over long distances. Their geometric consistency suggests the use of standardized measurements, repeated surveying methods, and a deep understanding of how to reproduce perfect shapes on uneven terrain. Modern engineers who attempted to map these structures often express disbelief at the level of mathematical control required to create them. Yet the Hopewell accomplished this through labor alone. Basket loads of earth moved by hand, coordinated by communities that shared purpose rather than hierarchy. Even more astonishing is the Hopewell's relationship with the sky. The Newark octagon is aligned with the northernmost moonrise during the lunar standstill, a rare event occurring once every 18.6 years. This alignment requires not only decades of observation but also the ability to preserve that knowledge across generations. It means the Hopewell were not simply building monuments, they were encoding the rhythms of the heavens into the landscape itself. Their ceremonial centers were cosmological calendars, structures designed to honor cycles of the moon, the sun, and perhaps celestial beings that played a role in their belief systems. Trade networks also flourished during this period, turning Hopewell centers into cultural crossroads. Obsidian from the Rockies, copper from the Great Lakes, mica from the Appalachians, and shells from the Gulf Coast all appeared at their sites. These materials were shaped into elaborate items, pipes, effigy figures, geometric tablets, objects that reveal a sophisticated symbolic language. The same symbols appeared across distant regions, suggesting an interconnected worldview shared among communities separated by hundreds of miles. This was not an empire, not a unified kingdom, but a ceremonial world held together by shared beliefs rather than political force. The Hopewell mystery deepens when we consider what they did not leave behind. No writing, no royal iconography, no depictions of war or conquest. Their monuments speak instead of harmony, ritual, and a connection between the earth and the sky. Yet the level of engineering sophistication suggests knowledge that predates them, concepts they inherited, refined, and expanded until their ceremonial landscapes rivaled the great symbolic sites of the ancient world. The Hopewell built not for power, but for meaning. Their structures were not the homes of kings, but diagrams of the universe, vast expressions of a worldview that saw geometry, astronomy, and human ritual as inseparable. And as impressive as these earthworks are, their story leads us toward an even deeper question about North America's ancient past. Where did the foundations of this knowledge come from, and how old might those roots truly be? As archaeologists mapped more Hopewell earthworks across the Midwest, a remarkable pattern began to emerge. These monuments were not isolated creations scattered at random. They formed a connected system stretching across hundreds of miles, as if the Hopewell viewed the entire region as a single ceremonial landscape. Circles matched circles from distant valleys. Squares shared identical proportions despite being built by separate communities. Even the long earthen avenues, some stretching for miles, were oriented with mathematical consistency. This coherence hints at a monumental vision that transcended individual tribes or leaders. The Hopewell were working from an inherited blueprint, a shared understanding of how sacred space should be shaped. Excavations reveal that their earthworks were built with layers of different soils, carefully chosen for color, texture, and durability. Dark layers alternate with light, forming patterns only visible when the mounds erode. This was not mere practicality. It was symbolism, an intentional representation of the layered world central to their cosmology. The sky realm above, the earth realm in the middle, and the underworld below. Each mound, circle, and pathway served as a symbolic bridge between these realms. The Hopewell did not build simply to mark territory. They built to situate themselves within a universe filled with meaning, cycles, and unseen forces. What makes the Hopewell especially intriguing is the absence of any clear political structure behind their monumental achievements. No palaces, no royal tombs, no fortified settlements. Their world was not shaped by kings or warriors, but by religious leaders, artisans, and astronomers who guided ceremonial activities. Communities traveled great distances to participate in these events. Pilgrims brought offerings of copper, obsidian, mica, and carved stone pipes, many adorned with animals believed to hold spiritual power. The Hopewell artistic tradition reflects an astonishing level of skill. Effigy figures with expressive detail, copper plates hammered into radiant shapes, and ornaments that resemble constellations or celestial symbols. These objects were not decorative. They were integral to rituals that united communities and reaffirmed shared cosmological beliefs. The Hopewell trade network was unlike anything else in prehistoric North America. Their influence reached from the Great Plains to the Atlantic coast, from the Gulf of Mexico to the Great Lakes. And yet, despite this far-reaching interconnection, the Hopewell never expanded into conquest. They expanded into meaning. Ideas, symbols, and ceremonial practices spread farther than armies ever could. This raises a striking question. How did such a widespread cultural system maintain coherence without central authority? The answer may lie in something rarely discussed, the possibility that the Hopewell inherited not only techniques for building geometric monuments, but also a philosophical framework older than their own culture. This possibility becomes stronger when one compares the Hopewell's alignments with older structures across the continent. Certain Adena circles hint at similar astronomical intentions, though on a smaller scale. And even these Adena sites echo older, more fragmentary earthworks buried beneath layers of soil, suggesting that knowledge of geometry and sky watching may have been passed down for centuries before the Hopewell began their monumental projects. If this is true, then Hopewell architecture represents the peak of a much older tradition, one that predated them, shaped them, and eventually faded into their legacy. But the greatest mystery of the Hopewell may be their sudden disappearance around 400 AD. Not gradual decline, disappearance. Trade networks ceased. Ceremonial centers fell silent. Earthworks were abandoned. No signs of invasion, no evidence of famine or collapse. It is as if the cultural engine that powered the Hopewell world simply dimmed, leaving behind only symbols carved in the soil. Some archaeologists believe climate fluctuations disrupted agricultural cycles. Others propose internal fragmentation or shifts in spiritual leadership. Yet none of these theories fully explain a phenomenon so widespread and so abrupt. What remains undeniable is that the Hopewell left behind a map drawn in earth and geometry, pointing toward origins older than their own. Their monuments whisper of inherited knowledge, preserved across generations long before the first Hopewell circle was carved into the landscape. And to uncover that older legacy, we must travel deeper into the ancient world of North America, where monumental construction was not only refined, it was reborn. Because beyond the Hopewell era lies a far older riddle, one shaped not by earth, but by stone, and guarded by the coils of a colossal serpent etched across the land. Long before Europeans set foot in North America, long before the Hopewell carved their vast geometric landscapes, a monumental figure already coiled across the ancient Ohio hills. A figure so immense, so precise, and so symbolically charged that even today it remains one of the continent's greatest enigmas. This is the Great Serpent Mound, a gigantic earthen effigy more than 1,300 feet long, shaped into the form of a winding serpent with its mouth open, seemingly swallowing or releasing a perfectly formed oval. From ground level, the effigy is mesmerizing, but when seen from above, its design takes on an almost supernatural clarity, as if it was always meant to be viewed from the sky. For more than a century, scholars debated its age and origins. Early estimates placed it within the Adena period, due to nearby burial mounds. Later theories connected it to Hopewell craftsmanship. Yet, radiocarbon studies from the early 2000s suggested something far more surprising. Parts of the structure may date to around 1000 AD, potentially linked to the Fort Ancient culture. But newer soil analyses challenge even that conclusion, suggesting the effigy could have been rebuilt multiple times, layered, reworked, and preserved through generations, possibly stretching its roots deep into prehistory. In this layered complexity lies the real mystery. Serpent Mound may not belong to one culture at all. Instead, it may represent the final expression of an ancient symbol that far predates the societies who inherited and maintained it. The effigy's serpentine body coils across a natural ridge formed millions of years ago by a meteor impact, a geological site known as the Serpent Mound crater. Whether intentional or coincidental, this placement adds another layer of significance. The serpent's curves align with solar events, its head marking the summer solstice sunset, its tail pointing toward the winter solstice sunrise, and several body bends correlating with equinoxes. Such alignments reflect an astonishing level of astronomical knowledge. Yet the mound's creators left no written explanations. Everything we know must be read from the soil, the sky, and the silence of its form. The serpent itself is a powerful symbol across numerous Native American traditions.
It represents renewal, transformation, the passage between worlds, and the cyclical nature of existence. But the serpent mound effigy is far too large, too deliberate, and too astronomically aligned to be merely symbolic. It is a cosmological statement, an ancient equation written in earth. From above, the oval near the serpent's mouth resembles the sun, the moon, or perhaps an egg, a universal image of origins and creation. Some researchers believe the entire effigy may represent a solar serpent myth shared across cultures, connecting the earth to the sky and the sky to the underworld. Yet the deeper one studies Serpent Mound, the clearer it becomes that this structure is not isolated. Across the Ohio Valley and beyond, there are dozens of smaller effigy mounds, birds, bears, panthers, even humanoid shapes, constructed by prehistoric societies with astonishing precision. Many of these effigies mirror constellations or celestial patterns, suggesting that ancient builders across the region may have seen the heavens as a map for understanding life on Earth. Their mounds were not merely monuments, they were star diagrams carved into the land. The serpent's orientation also connects to a broader celestial theme. Some researchers identify correlations between Serpent Mound's alignment and the constellation Draco, home to the ancient North Star thousands of years ago. If true, this would imply that the mound's original blueprint may date back to a time when Draco dominated the night sky, far earlier than previously believed. While this idea remains debated, it highlights an important truth. Serpent Mound is not a static monument tied to one era. It is a living timeline, rebuilt, reinterpreted, and re-sanctified by successive cultures who recognized its power. Artifacts found near the site add further intrigue. Many objects show signs of ritual use: shells, copper fragments, effigy pipes, and mica cut into mesmerizing shapes. These materials reflect long-distance trade and a belief system intertwined with celestial cycles. The presence of mica, shiny, reflective, almost mirror-like, suggests rituals associated with light, transformation, or communication with spirit realms. Combined with the serpent's cosmic alignments, these clues paint a picture of a sacred center dedicated not just to ceremony, but to understanding humanity's place within the universe. Serpent Mound stands today as one of the most enduring symbols of prehistoric North America, a structure that defies simple explanation, bridging earth and sky, myth and mathematics. But its true significance becomes clearer when we connect it to a wider landscape of enigmatic structures across the continent. Because the serpent is only one piece of a much larger puzzle, one that stretches from the Great Lakes to the Gulf Coast, revealing patterns of construction and celestial knowledge that hint at a forgotten chapter of human history. And at the heart of this chapter lies a force far more destructive and transformative than any monument could withstand. As researchers expanded their investigations beyond the Serpent Mound crater, they began noticing something unsettling: patterns of destruction scattered across ancient North America, as though a great force had once swept through the land, leaving geological scars, charred sediments, and abandoned ceremonial centers in its wake. These clues, once dismissed as anomalies, now form a mosaic pointing toward a catastrophic event thousands of years before written history. And in this context, Serpent Mound becomes more than a sacred effigy. It becomes a marker placed deliberately upon the scar of an ancient catastrophe, a monument to both remembrance and survival. Layers of soil surrounding the Serpent Mound ridge reveal evidence of intense heat, melted minerals, and disrupted bedrock consistent with a prehistoric impact event. Some scientists propose that the crater beneath the effigy formed millions of years ago. Others argue that the site shows indications of later cataclysms, perhaps linked to the Younger Dryas period, around 12,800 years ago, when global temperatures plummeted and countless species vanished.
While the debate continues, what remains clear is that ancient people recognized the ridge as a place of power. They felt something significant about this landform. Its height, its shape, its cosmic orientation, or perhaps its connection to an event preserved in oral tradition. Indigenous stories across North America tell of great serpents, sky serpents, and cosmic snakes associated with destruction and renewal. Some speak of serpents descending from the heavens, coiling through rivers, reshaping lands, or bringing fire to the world. Others describe stars falling, earth shaking, or the sky ripping open. While these tales may be metaphorical, they contain echoes of geological events, floods, impacts, or atmospheric disturbances witnessed by ancient ancestors. If Serpent Mound reflects such a memory, then the effigy may serve as a symbolic bridge between myth and prehistory, a reminder of forces far greater than human societies. The earthworks scattered around the serpent reinforce this idea. Many Hopewell and Fort Ancient mounds contain layers of burned soil, charcoal, and materials altered by extreme heat. Some of these layers correspond to sudden shifts in climate or unexplained destruction events. Other sites show rapid abandonment, as if entire communities migrated or reorganized in response to environmental upheaval. Serpent Mound, standing atop a ridge that visually dominates the surrounding landscape, may have served not only as a ceremonial site, but also as a marker of celestial patterns capable of predicting cycles of change. The mound's alignments with solstices and equinoxes imply a deep understanding of seasonal rhythms, but some researchers believe the serpent's design encodes even more complex astronomical cycles, those involving precession or rare lunar events. If the effigy's shape corresponds to the constellation Draco when it held the position of the North Star thousands of years ago, then the mound may preserve astronomical knowledge older than the cultures traditionally credited with building it. Whether built, rebuilt, or reinterpreted over centuries, the serpent became a repository of inherited wisdom, a monument that carried forward ideas too valuable to lose. Artifacts found at the site reinforce its sacred significance. Carved effigy pipes, copper ornaments, mica mirrors, and engraved stones reveal rituals centered on transformation, vision, and connection with celestial forces. The serpent's winding body may represent the path of the soul, the flow of rivers, or the movement of stars across the night sky. The oval in its mouth, sun, egg, or portal, may symbolize birth, renewal, or cosmic alignment. Each interpretation intertwines mythology with skywatching, geology with ceremony, and memory with landscape. But perhaps the most profound aspect of Serpent Mound is what it represents culturally: continuity. Generations preserved it, rebuilt it, and maintained its sacred geometry long after the original meaning blurred. They understood that the mound was more than a landmark. It was a legacy, connecting them to ancestors who witnessed events long forgotten by history. It was a map of the cosmos, a reminder of their place within a universe governed by cycles beyond human control. Yet as breathtaking as Serpent Mound is, it belongs to a broader pattern: structures across North America that reveal an ancient obsession with celestial alignment, monumental symbolism, and the interplay of earth and sky. These monuments do not exist in isolation. They point toward something older, something deeper, and something shared across vast distances. Because behind all these earthworks, Serpent Mound, Hopewell geometry, Adena circles, and the alignments of Cahokia, lies a question far more mysterious. What erased the civilizations that came before? And how many worlds were lost before history began? If there is one chapter of North America's ancient past that reshaped everything, its landscapes, its wildlife, its climates, and perhaps its earliest civilizations, it is the cataclysm that struck at the end of the Pleistocene. Around 12,800 years ago, Something changed the world with a speed and violence that still echoes through the continent's geology. Rivers rerouted, forests vanished, dozens of animal species disappeared forever, and human populations that had lived on the land for generations were forced to adapt, migrate, or perish. For decades, scientists debated what triggered this sudden transformation. But as more evidence emerges from sediment cores, impact markers, and sites scattered from Canada to the Carolinas, a chilling possibility becomes harder to ignore. North America may have been at the heart of a cosmic disaster. Across the continent, a thin layer of dark sediment called the black mat marks the boundary between the world that existed before the Younger Dryas cooling and the one that emerged after. This layer contains microspherules, melt glass, nanodiamonds, and traces of platinum, materials that form under extreme heat, the kind produced by an impact or a massive atmospheric burst. Clovis sites, once home to skilled hunter-gatherers, show abrupt abandonment. Mammoths, mastodons, giant sloths, saber-toothed cats, and other megafauna vanished with astonishing speed, leaving behind fossil beds that resemble scenes of sudden crisis rather than slow decline. Some regions show evidence of wildfires so vast that they scorched millions of acres, darkening the skies and destabilizing climates for centuries. While the precise nature of the cataclysm remains debated, one theory has gained particular traction: that fragments of a disintegrating comet exploded over North America, unleashing a chain reaction of fire, shock waves, and atmospheric changes. Whether or not a physical impact struck the land, the environmental consequences were undeniable.
Temperatures plummeted, glaciers surged, and landscapes that had flourished for thousands of years were thrown into chaos. Lakes drained, rivers froze or rerouted, and fertile habitats collapsed. Human groups living across the continent faced unimaginable challenges. Some retreated southward. Others adapted by shifting their diets, tools, and ways of life. Still others likely vanished, their stories lost to time. But the Younger Dryas cataclysm was not only a geological and ecological event. It may also explain some of the mysteries surrounding North America's earliest monumental traditions. Oral histories passed down by indigenous nations speak of a world-ending disaster. Falling stars, roaring fires, endless darkness, and floods that reshaped the earth. These stories, though filtered through myth and symbolism, may preserve memories of real events witnessed by ancient ancestors. If a great catastrophe struck the continent, it would have disrupted long-standing cultural traditions, scattering knowledge carriers and forcing survivors to rebuild anew. Ideas about the cosmos, cycles of destruction and renewal, and the need to align with celestial forces may have taken on even greater importance as a result. The traces of this trauma may still be visible in the symbolic architecture that emerged thousands of years later. The serpent swallowing an egg, circles aligned with solstices, effigies pointing toward celestial events. These motifs, repeated across distant societies, suggest a worldview shaped by both reverence and caution. They speak of ancestors who looked to the sky not only for guidance, but for warning. For those who witnessed a cosmic event, the heavens would never again feel like a distant, passive realm. Instead, the sky became a force, one capable of transforming the world in an instant. In the wake of such devastation, North America entered a long period of recovery. Forests regrew, rivers stabilized, new ecosystems formed, and gradually, the descendants of those who survived the cataclysm began building again, reviving ceremonial practices, restoring astronomical traditions, and shaping the land into symbols of meaning. The Hopewell, the Adena, the builders of Serpent Mound, all may have carried fragments of older knowledge, inherited from people who survived a world-ending event thousands of years earlier. But the cataclysm's legacy does not end with environmental change. It poses a deeper question, one that challenges our understanding of ancient North America. What cultures existed before the disaster, and what were their achievements, their monuments, their stories? The absence of direct evidence is not proof of absence. Cataclysms erase. They bury. They reset the clock of history. And somewhere beneath the layers of soil, ancient riverbeds, and glacial deposits, there may lie traces of civilizations erased before the world had a chance to remember them. As the shock of the Younger Dryas cataclysm rippled across North America, the continent entered a period of profound transformation. Ecosystems collapsed, then slowly re-emerged. River systems carved new paths across the land, dissolving ancient shorelines and burying old landscapes in layers of sediment. What had once been thriving environments became harsh and unpredictable. For the people living through this period, survival demanded adaptation on a scale their ancestors had never faced. Stone tool traditions shifted. Hunting practices changed. Plant-gathering strategies evolved. Communities fragmented, merged, or migrated in search of stability. And in this crucible of upheaval, new cultural identities emerged, shaped in part by the trauma of a world reset. Archaeological sites from the early Holocene reveal sudden breaks in cultural continuity. Clovis technologies vanish almost instantly from the record, replaced by new tools and new styles that appear rapidly and without gradual evolution. This abrupt shift suggests not slow innovation, but survival-driven reinvention. Oral histories from indigenous nations echo this sentiment. Many stories speak of the time when the world changed, when ancestors fled rising waters or falling fire, seeking refuge in caves, mountains, or sacred places. These narratives, though metaphorical, align with geological evidence of dramatic climate fluctuations, megafloods triggered by melting ice sheets, and wildfires that swept across entire regions. Some researchers propose that before the Younger Dryas, North America may have supported larger and more interconnected human populations than mainstream models assume. If so, the cataclysm would have scattered these communities, erasing their monuments, their settlements, and their material legacy beneath layers of glacial runoff and post-impact debris. The very absence of early monumental architecture may be less a sign of primitive societies and more a consequence of catastrophic loss. Civilizations do not always disappear because they lacked sophistication. Sometimes they vanish because the planet itself rewrites the landscape with overwhelming force. The centuries following the cataclysm show signs of gradual cultural regeneration. Hunter-gatherer groups began to stabilize as climates warmed. New trade routes emerged. Tool-making traditions diversified. Over thousands of years, societies slowly began reclaiming a relationship with the land, not as conquerors, but as survivors, rebuilding meaning in a world that had once nearly destroyed them. It is within this long arc of recovery that the seeds of later monumental traditions took root. Knowledge of the sky, cycles of the moon, and solstice patterns, if preserved through memory, ritual, or symbolic stories, would have become sacred. Such knowledge may have been seen as essential for navigating a universe capable of sudden disaster. This helps explain why so many ancient North American monuments encode astronomical alignments. It was not mere curiosity. It was insurance, a way to track time, cycles, warnings, a way to interpret the moods of the heavens. The people who rebuilt this continent inherited a worldview shaped by both reverence for celestial forces and fear of their destructive potential. Serpent Mound aligned with solstices. The Hopewell octagon aligned with lunar standstill cycles. Cahokia's Woodhenge aligned with solar movements. These were not coincidences. They were expressions of a philosophy carved into the earth, a philosophy born from survival. The cataclysm's legacy may also explain the interconnectedness of later cultures. After witnessing devastation on a continental scale,
Communities may have forged networks not through conquest, but through shared belief. Trade networks expanded. Symbolic traditions spread. Cosmological ideas traveled across regions, binding societies through common purpose. Monumental building was not an assertion of power, but an affirmation of identity, a collective act of remembrance. The earthworks, mounds, and effigies that would emerge thousands of years later were monuments not only to the sky, but to endurance. Yet the most haunting aspect of the Younger Dryas cataclysm is its implication for what came before. Archaeologists increasingly acknowledge that pre-cataclysm North America remains poorly understood. Rising seas drowned ancient coastlines. Floods buried valleys under layers of silt. Impact debris sealed entire landscapes beneath dark mats of sediment. What civilizations lived before this disaster? What knowledge did they hold? What stories did they tell? Their absence in the archaeological record is not evidence they never existed, only that they were erased. And so the cataclysm becomes a threshold in time, dividing the world that was lost from the one that re-emerged. It casts a shadow across every ancient structure on the continent. Because to understand the Adena, the Hopewell, the builders of Serpent Mound, or the people of Cahokia, we must first consider what the ancestors of these cultures endured. They inherited a wounded world, and from its ruins, they built a new one. But the trauma of this cosmic event also set the stage for something extraordinary: the revival of ancient sky-watching traditions, preserved through millennia of memory. And in those memories lies a story told not through artifacts, but through the voices of the ancestors themselves. Long before archaeologists sifted through soil layers or mapped ancient earthworks from the air, the first North Americans carried their histories in stories, not written in alphabets or carved into stone, but spoken, passed from parent to child, elder to youth, generation to generation. These oral traditions, preserved for thousands of years, form one of the most important records of the ancient world. They are windows into experiences that archaeology cannot fully capture. Memories of migrations, battles against the elements, encounters with powerful forces of nature, and events so monumental that they reshaped entire cultures. While many researchers once dismissed such stories as myth or metaphor, a growing body of evidence suggests that they may preserve kernels of historical truth, echoes of real events witnessed by ancestors long before history began. Throughout North America, indigenous nations tell stories that begin with worlds destroyed and worlds reborn. The Hopi speak of previous ages that collapsed through fire, ice, or darkness, each one ending with a transformation of the earth. The Cherokee describe a time when the sky fell and the world was flooded, forcing their ancestors to seek shelter in high places. The Lakota recount cosmic serpents and star beings who shaped the land. The Zuni and Pueblo peoples tell of migrations guided by the sun, the moon, and celestial guardians. These narratives are not isolated. They share themes: destruction, renewal, cosmic intervention, and the need to maintain harmony with forces far beyond human control. For centuries, Western scholars categorized these stories as cosmological allegories. But new geological discoveries, climate studies, and evidence of prehistoric cataclysms raise a compelling question. What if some of these oral histories describe real events? The sudden cooling of the Younger Dryas, megafloods triggered by melting ice, firestorms ignited by fragments of a breaking comet, atmospheric phenomena that would have appeared to ancient observers as serpents of fire streaking across the sky. When viewed through this lens, oral traditions transform from mythology into preserved memory, cultural time capsules carrying prehistoric experiences into the present. Even stories of celestial beings may reflect ancient astronomical knowledge. Many indigenous cultures possess detailed star lore, mapping constellations and celestial cycles with remarkable accuracy. The Lakota star maps correspond to geographic landmarks. The Pawnee constructed villages based on star patterns. The Navajo incorporated cosmic cycles into ceremonial life. These traditions reveal a world in which the sky was not merely a backdrop, but a living system filled with meaning. And this worldview aligns with the sophisticated astronomical alignments found in earthworks across the continent. The Adena circles, Hopewell octagons, and Cahokia's woodhenge all reflect careful observation of solar and lunar movements, suggesting that indigenous skywatching traditions extend deep into prehistory. But oral traditions do more than preserve knowledge of the sky. They preserve migrations, movements across landscapes that archaeologists are only beginning to understand. Some stories describe journeys from great waters, suggesting origins near ancient coastlines now drowned by rising seas. Others speak of ancestors who lived in regions now barren or drastically altered by climate change. These narratives may reflect real migrations that occurred after the cataclysm reset large parts of the continent's ecosystems. When combined with genetic evidence showing multiple waves of ancient movement across North America, the oral histories gain new significance. They are not just stories, they are maps. The power of oral tradition lies in its resilience. While written civilizations may lose records to fire, flood, or decay, spoken histories can survive as long as they remain rooted in culture. The fact that themes of destruction, renewal, cosmic upheaval, and recreation appear across so many indigenous stories suggests a shared ancestral experience, one possibly linked to the traumatic events of the late Pleistocene. These stories also embody philosophical frameworks that helped ancient communities maintain balance with the land. They emphasize humility, respect, environmental awareness, and the cyclical nature of existence. Such ideas likely influenced the monumental traditions that blossomed thousands of years later. Listening to the voices of the ancestors reveals another truth. The monumental earthworks across North America were not isolated engineering feats. They were expressions of cosmology rooted in memory of places, events, and forces that shaped the earliest cultures on the continent. And yet, as powerful as oral tradition is, it leads us toward an even deeper mystery. What forgotten knowledge might still lie hidden beneath the soil, waiting for science to rediscover what the ancestors preserved through story alone? Because while oral histories speak of worlds destroyed and worlds reborn, they also hint at ancient cities, lost homelands, and monumental places swallowed by time. And to uncover these forgotten homelands, we must follow the oldest stories to their most mysterious destination, into the earth itself. As researchers compared indigenous oral histories across North America, patterns emerged, patterns that mirrored archaeological discoveries in ways too striking to dismiss. Stories from tribes separated by thousands of miles spoke of ancient homelands now lost, river valleys swallowed by rising waters, mountains that once served as refuges during a time of darkness, and sacred places buried beneath layers of earth. These narratives may seem symbolic, but when mapped onto the geological transformations that occurred at the end of the last ice age, they begin to form a coherent picture of a continent reshaped by catastrophe and memory. The Pacific Northwest tribes speak of a time when the ocean surged inland, destroying entire communities. Along the Gulf Coast, traditions recall ancient villages lost to the sea when the world drowned. In the Northeast, Algonquian stories describe ancestors following retreating glaciers, moving across landscapes that no longer exist. Many Plains tribes tell of migrations triggered by fires in the sky, a motif that echoes sedimentary evidence of massive wildfires following the Younger Dryas event. And across the Southwest, Pueblo and Hopi traditions recount subterranean worlds, places where ancestors emerged after a period of darkness and cold. These emergent stories, often interpreted spiritually, align in surprising ways with evidence that early peoples sought shelter in caves and rock shelters during periods of extreme climate instability. Some of the most compelling parallels appear when oral histories reference ancient structures or cities. Several southeastern tribes speak of earth lodges, platform mounds, and ceremonial centers built before the world changed. Though often stylized in mythic language, these descriptions align closely with archaeological findings of early mound-building traditions. Other stories hint at ancient road systems, straight, aligned pathways stretching across the land. This correlates with Hopewell alignments and long earthen avenues constructed thousands of years after the cataclysm, suggesting a continuity of sacred landscape design rooted in very ancient memory. One recurring theme across many oral traditions is that knowledge must be protected and passed down because it was nearly lost once before. Elders speak of guardians responsible for remembering astronomical cycles, seasonal markers, and survival lessons learned in a time of upheaval. These traditions seem to echo a prehistoric reality. After the cataclysm, knowledge became fragile. Communities had to preserve what they could through stories, ceremonies, and symbolic practices, even when stable environments had been destroyed. This cultural resilience helps explain why skywatching became so central to ancient North American societies. If ancestors had witnessed cosmic events capable of reshaping the world, observing the heavens would have become more than ritual, it would have become necessary. The solstice alignments of Cahokia's Woodhenge, the lunar calculations embedded in Hopewell earthworks, and the cosmic serpent of Ohio all reflect a worldview shaped by vigilance. The people were watching the sky not only to understand time, but to prepare for change. Oral traditions also provide clues about ancient migrations following the cataclysm. Trails described in stories sometimes correspond to archaeological corridors through which post-Ice Age populations traveled. Genetic evidence supports multiple migration waves across the continent, some aligning with routes preserved in oral narratives. These journeys were not random wanderings, but purposeful movements guided by memory, prophecy, and environmental opportunity. The most intriguing aspect of these stories is their reference to places that no longer exist: valleys, plains, and coastlines swallowed by rising seas or buried under floods. If early North American cultures built structures along ancient shorelines, riverbanks, or glacial meltwater channels, those sites may now lie underwater or beneath meters of sediment, invisible to modern archaeology. This possibility reframes the question of why monumental traditions appear to begin with the Adena and Hopewell. It suggests we may be looking at the remnants of a much older continuum of knowledge whose earliest chapters are buried beyond reach. Oral histories do not provide blueprints or timelines, but they offer perspective, a window into how ancient peoples understood their world, remembered its transformations, and preserved its lessons. They tell of ancestors who endured cycles of destruction and renewal, who built, lost, rebuilt, and continued to pass knowledge forward even when landscapes changed. These voices reveal a cultural continuity that spans millennia, connecting prehistoric skywatchers to the builders of monumental earthworks. Yet as powerful as these stories are, they lead to an even more tantalizing question. If memories of lost homelands and ancient catastrophes survived into the present, what physical evidence might still lie hidden beneath the earth? What forgotten cities, ceremonial centers, or monumental structures might be waiting to be uncovered? Because as oral traditions guide us into the deeper past, they converge on a single theme. Beneath the land we walk today lies an older world, one built by ancestors whose identities remain shrouded in mystery. And to uncover that world, we must follow the traces buried in the earth itself. For most of American history, the ground beneath our feet was treated as nothing more than soil, layers of sediment, clay, and rock hiding nothing of importance.
Farmland was plowed, highways carved across ancient riverbeds, suburbs grew over forgotten landscapes. Yet beneath these familiar surfaces lies a deeper world, one concealed by thousands of years of erosion, flooding, and geological transformation. Thanks to advances in remote sensing and LiDAR scanning technology, archaeologists are beginning to see what previous generations could not. Entire ancient settlements, geometric earthworks, and buried ceremonial complexes preserved just below the surface, invisible to the naked eye. These findings are rewriting everything we thought we knew about prehistoric North America. In the rolling forests of the southeast, LiDAR has revealed monumental shapes hidden beneath vegetation, perfect circles, straight causeways, and expansive plazas that would have once been major gathering places. In Louisiana's Poverty Point, one of the continent's oldest known complexes, scanning has uncovered layers of construction previously missed by traditional excavation. The site is now understood to be far older and more elaborate than early researchers believed, with concentric ridges forming one of the world's largest earthen designs from antiquity. Yet, Poverty Point is only one example. Across the Mississippi Valley and the Midwest, LiDAR has identified patterns of buried earthworks that mirror the geometric precision of the Hopewell and hint at even earlier ceremonial landscapes. One of the most astonishing revelations comes from the Appalachian foothills, where large rectangular platforms and circular enclosures lie hidden beneath centuries of forest growth. Some of these structures match Adena and Hopewell designs, while others predate them, buried so deeply that their origins remain unclear.
These discoveries challenge the traditional chronological sequence of mound-building cultures, suggesting that earthwork construction may be part of a much older tradition, one whose earliest phases have been lost to sediment and time. Farther north, near the Great Lakes, researchers have begun uncovering what appear to be remnants of ancient settlements long submerged beneath lakes formed by glacial retreat. Underwater surveys reveal stone alignments, geometric patterns, and what may be remnants of ancient hunting structures. Some underwater formations at Lake Huron resemble caribou drive lanes used by prehistoric peoples when the lakebed was once dry land. These findings not only offer insight into early subsistence strategies, but hint at much larger landscapes that now lie underwater. Entire cultural regions may rest beneath the Great Lakes, sealed away since the meltwater floods that followed the Younger Dryas cataclysm. In the Midwest, buried geometric formations pose even bigger questions. LiDAR detected an enormous square enclosure, nearly indistinguishable from ground level, hidden beneath farm fields in Indiana. Similar patterns have been found in Missouri and Illinois, each representing structures too massive to be simple habitations. Their consistent proportions suggest engineering principles shared across vast distances. How did ancient builders coordinate these designs without a central authority, without writing, without visible roads, and without any known means of viewing their constructions from above? The answer may lie in older traditions passed down through generations, traditions rooted in memory, astronomy, and sacred landscape design. As more buried sites come to light, archaeologists realize how much has been lost. Soil deposition from ancient floods buried early settlements under meters of silt. Glacial retreat reshaped entire valleys, washing away evidence of prehistoric structures. Deforestation and agriculture erased outlines of earthen monuments before scholars even knew they existed. And yet, beneath all this transformation, traces remain, faint, fragile, but unmistakable. North America's ancient cultures did not simply vanish. Their cities, plazas, processional paths, and ceremonial centers lie sleeping beneath the surface, waiting for the right tools to reveal their stories. But even these buried landscapes are only part of the picture. Some oral traditions speak of tunnels, cavern systems, and subterranean chambers where ancestors sought refuge during times of darkness or upheaval. While many such tales are symbolic, a few have surprising archaeological parallels: collapsed cave systems containing ancient artifacts, chambers carved into bluff faces, and rock shelters filled with ritual objects. Combined with LiDAR evidence, these discoveries point toward a complex ancient world extending both above and below ground. The more we uncover, the clearer one truth becomes. The North American continent we see today is only the latest version of itself. Beneath forests, beneath fields, beneath layers of time lie the remains of older worlds. Worlds shaped by cultures we are only beginning to understand. And yet, the most remarkable discovery still lies ahead, because buried within this hidden landscape are traces of a civilization older, larger, and more complex than scholars believed possible. As LiDAR surveys expanded beyond isolated regions, a remarkable revelation emerged. Many of the buried structures across North America were not random or isolated. They formed patterns. Patterns too large to see without modern technology, too faint to detect through traditional excavation, yet unmistakable when viewed from above. Circles aligned with squares. Long parallel avenues connected distant enclosures. Hidden mounds mirrored celestial patterns. These buried formations suggested something that archaeologists had only whispered for years. Beneath the modern landscape are the remains of a forgotten cultural network far older than any known civilization on the continent. In Illinois, a vast grid of buried earthworks was discovered beneath farmland just miles from Cahokia. The layout includes rectangular enclosures stretching for hundreds of meters, parallel embankments that once guided processions, and circular structures resembling the earliest Adena forms. Soil cores reveal multiple construction phases, layered through time, suggesting that the site was used and rebuilt for centuries. Some sections predate Cahokia, others seem contemporary with it. Still others appear even older, hinting at a sequence of monumental building reaching deep into prehistory. The implications are staggering. Cahokia may not have been a sudden eruption of cultural complexity. It may have been the latest revival of traditions passed down through forgotten ages. Further east, in the Ohio River Valley, LiDAR uncovered geometric designs that bear striking resemblance to the Hopewell's greatest works, yet lie buried beneath layers of sediment far older than the known Hopewell period. These outlines are faint, eroded by time and stripped of their upper layers, but their proportions remain astonishingly regular. Could the Hopewell have been reinterpreting architectural traditions far older than their own? Or did they inherit memory fragments, ritual stories, astronomical cycles, or geometric principles preserved in oral tradition long after the original builders were gone? The Southeast offers even deeper mysteries. In Georgia and Alabama, LiDAR scans revealed ancient platform complexes concealed beneath forest canopies, rectangular constructions aligned with solstices surrounded by ditch and embankment structures. Many of these lie beneath natural sediment deposited by millennia of flooding. Radiocarbon samples suggest some may date to early Holocene periods, long before recognized mound-building cultures. If true, this challenges the foundational timeline of North American prehistory. Monumental construction may have begun not 3,000 years ago, but 5, 6, or even 7,000 years earlier, only to be buried by floods, forgotten, and later rediscovered unconsciously by later cultures. Along the Mississippi's ancient channels, researchers have detected entire paleolands, former riverbanks now deeply buried under layers of alluvium. On these submerged terraces lie outlines of what may have been early habitation clusters or ceremonial platforms, now impossible to excavate without massive engineering efforts. Yet, their geometric consistency, visible in LiDAR cross-sections, suggests purposeful design rather than natural formation. These hidden sites could represent some of the earliest ceremonial landscapes in North America, constructed by cultures who lived before the Younger Dryas cold snap drastically altered the continent's hydrology. Underwater discoveries add another layer to the mystery. In Lake Michigan, sonar imaging revealed rectangular stone patterns on submerged ridges, including what appears to be a hunting structure similar to those found in Lake Huron. Some formations seem intentionally arranged, others follow natural glacial lines. But each discovery highlights a simple truth. Ancient North America contained landscapes now inaccessible beneath water. Whatever cultures inhabited those regions left behind traces that only modern technology can rediscover. As buried sites accumulate, a picture begins to form. A picture of a continent where monumental traditions evolved, collapsed, and re-emerged multiple times across thousands of years. The Adena, Hopewell, and Cahokia may be the visible layers of a much deeper story, a story of ancient builders whose earliest works lie hidden beneath soil, erased by cataclysm, or submerged by rising waters.
This deeper story is only now coming into focus, piece by piece, as scanning technology peels back the surface like a veil. The greatest question, however, remains unanswered. Were these buried networks isolated expressions of independent cultures, or were they part of a continental tradition, passed down from forgotten ancestors whose world ended long before ours began? The evidence hints at cultural inheritance, shared symbols, aligned geometry, and astronomical traditions too consistent to be coincidence. And as these possibilities unfold, they point toward a final, astonishing revelation. The buried landscapes of North America may contain the oldest monumental traditions on the continent. Structures built long before Cahokia, long before the Hopewell, perhaps even before the cataclysm that reshaped the world. To uncover the truth, we must step back into the deep timeline of the continent and confront the question of who the first true builders of America really were. As archaeologists traced the buried landscapes of North America, a question began to echo louder than any other. Who were the first architects of this continent? Not the Adena, not the Hopewell, not the Mississippian builders of Cahokia. These cultures inherited traditions, refined them, and expanded them, but the deeper we look, the clearer it becomes that they were participating in a legacy far older than their own timelines suggest. A legacy rooted in the earliest human presence on the continent, people who adapted to the Ice Age, survived cataclysms, and carried memories of a world that no longer exists. For decades, the dominant theory held that the Clovis people were the first Americans, arriving around 13,000 years ago. But newly discovered sites have shattered that assumption. At Meadowcroft Rock Shelter, artifacts date back nearly 19,000 years. At the Galt site in Texas, ancient tools suggest cultural continuity stretching deep into prehistory. In South Carolina, the Topper site reveals layers of occupation that may reach even further back. And in the Pacific Northwest, footprints preserved in clay tell of families walking along ancient coastlines long before the Clovis tool tradition ever appeared. These discoveries push the initial settlement of North America thousands of years earlier than textbooks once acknowledged, and with each push, the possibility grows that early inhabitants may have carried traditions or knowledge from even older homelands. But the most puzzling revelations come not from tools or bones, but from architecture, signs of early construction that defy the expectations placed on Ice Age cultures. Along ancient river systems, researchers have identified circular earth formations buried under layers of sediment, structures that predate known mound-building cultures by millennia. On the Great Plains, remnants of aligned depressions hint at early ceremonial or communal spaces. And beneath the Great Lakes, underwater ridges with stone alignments suggest complex hunting strategies that required coordinated planning. These were not mere campsites. They were structured spaces, deliberately engineered for social, ritual, or practical purposes. They reveal that the first Americans were not isolated wanderers, but organized groups capable of shaping their environment in meaningful ways. Genetic evidence adds another piece to the puzzle. Studies of ancient DNA show that early populations in North America were far more diverse than previously thought, with multiple lineages contributing to the continent's early peopling. Some lineages appear briefly, then disappear, extinguished perhaps by climate shifts, migrations, or catastrophic events. Others persist, eventually blending into the ancestors of today's indigenous nations. This genetic mosaic suggests that the first Americans were not a single culture, but a tapestry of groups with their own traditions, art forms, and cosmologies. If monumental traditions later emerged across the continent, it is plausible that knowledge of sacred alignments, geometric patterns, or ceremonial practices originated within these early societies, long before the great mounds rose from the earth. Oral traditions support this idea. Many indigenous stories speak of ancestors who lived in the first world, a place before the great floods or fires that reshaped the land. These ancestors often possessed knowledge of the sky, the earth, and the cycles that governed life. Their stories describe migrations guided by celestial signs, rituals performed in harmony with solstices, and sacred spaces aligned with natural forces. These themes are strikingly consistent with later monumental traditions, suggesting continuity of ideas across vast spans of time. The monuments of the Adena, Hopewell, and Cahokia may reflect an ancient cosmological framework preserved through countless generations. Archaeologists increasingly recognize that the earliest builders of North America likely saw the world as a series of interconnected realms: sky, earth, and water, each requiring balance and respect. Their constructions, whether simple stone alignments or early earth formations, embodied this worldview. They were expressions of a sacred relationship with the land, a relationship inherited, transformed, and expanded by later cultures. Yet the clearest sign that early builders shaped the continent lies not in isolated structures, but in the cultural memory embedded within later monumental traditions. The geometric precision of the Hopewell, the cosmological alignments of the Serpent Mound, and the engineered landscapes of Cahokia all hint at knowledge too complex to emerge suddenly. They represent the maturation of ideas carried forward through time, ideas first nurtured by the continent's earliest inhabitants. But if these early societies carried the seeds of monumental tradition, what happened to their largest settlements? Where are their ceremonial centers, their gathering spaces, their sacred constructions? Are they buried beneath rivers, drowned beneath ancient coastlines, or lost beneath floodplains formed after the cataclysm? The absence of direct evidence suggests the possibility of enormous loss. And this brings us to the final and most compelling piece of the mystery. If we follow the clues left by buried landscapes, ancient DNA, and ancestral stories, they all point toward a forgotten cradle of civilization hiding beneath the continent's deepest layers, waiting to be uncovered. As evidence accumulated from buried landscapes, underwater structures, ancient DNA, and persistent oral traditions, a bold hypothesis began to take shape among researchers willing to challenge established narratives. North America may have hosted a cultural center far older than any recognized today, a cradle of monumental building whose signatures remain faint, scattered, or hidden beneath millennia of geological change. This hypothesis is not a fanciful leap, but a logical conclusion drawn from converging clues. Every discovery, every anomaly, every unexplained geometric outline points toward an origin story deeper than the archaeological record currently reveals. Consider the consistency of sacred geometry across the continent. Circles, squares, and cardinal alignments appear repeatedly in structures separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years. These shapes are not random. They represent a coherent cosmological framework, one that views the world as interconnected realms requiring balance and order.
If such a framework emerged independently in multiple regions, we would expect variation. Yet the similarities are striking. A perfect circle in ancient Ohio mirrors one in the southeast. A processional avenue in the Midwest resembles one in the south. Solstice alignments appear in sites with no documented contact. This degree of cultural cohesion hints at deep ancestral roots. The possibility that North America once housed an early center of ceremonial development is further supported by the scale of ancient environmental changes. When the last ice sheets melted, entire landscapes vanished under water or beneath silt. Coastal plains that once stretched miles into the ocean now rest on the continental shelf, unreachable except through underwater archaeology. If early builders lived along these ancient coastlines, as many migration and settlement models suggest, then their greatest achievements may lie drowned beneath hundreds of feet of water. Without access to these submerged regions, the archaeological record remains incomplete, offering only glimpses of cultural complexity that may once have been widespread. Genetic studies also support the idea of deep cultural continuity. Distinct lineages appear and disappear across the continent's early timeline, some leaving only faint traces in modern populations. These lineages may represent groups who developed unique traditions, monumental practices, or cosmologies before being disrupted by cataclysmic events or climate shifts. Their contributions, though invisible in artifacts, survive in the symbolic logic of later cultures. The persistence of celestial motifs, sun symbols, serpents, cosmic pathways, suggests that descendants preserved fragments of ancient teachings, passing them through rituals long after their original meanings faded. Oral traditions reinforce this sense of deep time. Many indigenous stories describe ancestors emerging from destroyed worlds, led into new epochs by star beings or celestial guardians. They speak of ancient cities turned to dust, valleys swallowed by rising waters, or sacred places hidden beneath the earth. While symbolic, these narratives carry emotional weight, a sense of profound loss woven into cultural memory. They may reflect real events experienced by early societies whose monumental achievements were erased by natural forces beyond their control. As technology advances, archaeology stands at the threshold of rediscovering this forgotten era. LiDAR, sonar mapping, sediment analysis, and ancient DNA offer tools capable of unveiling what the Earth has concealed for thousands of years. Already, glimpses of ancient ceremonial landscapes have appeared beneath the soil and water. It is only a matter of time before more definitive evidence emerges. And when it does, it may reveal that the Adena, Hopewell, and Cahokia were not the beginning of North America's monumental tradition, but its inheritors, the caretakers of a legacy established by the continent's earliest architects. These first builders may have lived in climatic conditions radically different from today: glacial plains, vast grasslands, and sprawling coastlines now erased. They may have developed sacred alignments based on celestial observation, creating structures that symbolized the balance of earth and sky. They may have passed down rituals grounded in survival through catastrophe, embedding cautionary cosmology into ceremonial practices. Their works, if preserved at all, would lie beneath sediments, floodplains, or submerged continental shelves. The implications are profound. If North America was once home to an early monumental tradition, older than the Great Mounds, older than Serpent Mound, older even than known post-Ice Age cultures, then the story of human civilization becomes richer, more interconnected, and far more complex than textbooks have ever admitted. But this revelation leads us to one final question, the most important of all. If an ancient monumental world once thrived here, what remains of it today? And what can its remnants tell us about the lost builders of prehistoric America? To answer that, we must turn to the final chapter where all clues converge: the identity, legacy, and enduring mystery of the lost builders.
Who were the lost builders? Not simply the Adena, Hopewell, or Cahokia, though each inherited fragments of an ancient legacy. Not merely the early hunter-gatherers or Ice Age survivors, though their endurance shaped the foundations of later cultures. The lost builders represent something deeper, the convergence of knowledge, memory, environmental adaptation, and cosmology that began long before recognized civilizations flourished. They were the people who first looked at the sky and saw patterns, who watched the seasons and recognized cycles, who shaped Earth into symbols, aligning their lives with forces far greater than themselves. Their works may be scattered, buried, or erased, but their influence permeates every monumental tradition that followed. To understand the lost builders, we must reconstruct a world that no longer exists. Imagine North America at the end of the last ice age. Vast grasslands stretching across the Midwest, herds of megafauna roaming ancient plains, coastlines extending miles beyond their current boundaries. Early inhabitants moved across these landscapes not as isolated bands, but as interconnected communities, sharing resources, stories, and strategies for survival. Their movements created networks, social, symbolic, and practical, that endured for millennia. It is within these networks that the seeds of monumental building first took root. Early circular enclosures, stone alignments, and engineered hunting structures offer glimpses of their capabilities. Even if simple in appearance, they required planning, cooperation, and a shared understanding of sacred space. Over thousands of years, these early practices evolved. Groups learned to track celestial cycles, solstices, equinoxes, lunar standstills. They wove these observations into rituals, teaching their children to honor the forces that governed the world. These early astronomers were not scientists in the modern sense, but keen observers whose survival often depended on understanding seasonal changes. Their knowledge formed the backbone of cosmological frameworks that would later shape monumental architecture. The lost builders may not have created grand monuments in stone, but they were masters of earth. Soil, clay, gravel, and sand were their canvas. They shaped these materials into mounds, enclosures, pathways, and effigies, structures that blended seamlessly with the natural world. Earth was abundant, pliable, and symbolic. It represented birth, renewal, transformation. By sculpting the land, they honored ancestors, celestial beings, and forces beyond their comprehension. Their monuments were both practical and spiritual. Markers for gatherings, alignments for rituals, and symbols of unity across communities. Trade played a crucial role in spreading their ideas. Long before the elaborate networks of the Hopewell, early groups exchanged tools, pigments, shells, and sacred objects across great distances. These exchanges carried knowledge, stories of distant lands, sightings of celestial events, techniques for crafting, gardening, and mound building. Through these interactions, cultural patterns spread, evolved, and solidified. Over time, a shared symbolic language emerged, one that interpreted the world through geometry, directionality, and cosmic cycles. But the defining characteristics of the lost builders may lie not in their structures, but in their resilience. They endured catastrophic shifts, ice sheets retreating, floods reshaping valleys, fires sweeping across forests, and climates oscillating between extremes. These challenges forged a worldview grounded in adaptability and respect for natural forces. Rituals were designed to maintain balance. Monuments were aligned to track time, predict change, and honor memory. Even when their settlements vanished or their traditions fractured, core ideas persisted, carried by descendants who rebuilt, reinterpreted, and expanded upon ancient foundations. When later cultures rose, the Adena shaping ceremonial landscapes, the Hopewell constructing geometric masterpieces, The Cahokians building monumental cities. They did not emerge from emptiness. They grew from a continuum of ancestral knowledge. Their earthworks represent the culmination of ideas first nurtured by people who lived through ice, fire, flood, and darkness. The lost builders were not a single people or culture, but a lineage of societies connected through time, a deep, ancient thread weaving the continent's past into a shared heritage. Yet despite their profound influence, the lost builders remain largely invisible. Their earliest works are buried under sediment, submerged beneath lakes, or eroded by time. Their stories survive only in the faint echoes of oral traditions, the symbolic patterns of later monuments, and the subtle alignments of structures long misunderstood. But the clues they left behind form a trail, one that leads toward a deeper understanding of North America's monumental legacy. And as we follow this trail, a final realization emerges. The lost builders are not merely figures of the past. They are the foundation upon which every ancient civilization of this continent was built. As we reach the end of this journey across ancient America, a remarkable truth begins to crystallize. The continent's monumental legacy, its circles and squares, its serpent effigies and towering mounds, its celestial alignments and buried cities, is not the product of isolated cultures rising and falling in neat chronological order. It is the product of a continuum, a long, unbroken chain of knowledge passed from one generation to the next, shaped by survival, memory, and an enduring desire to understand humanity's place within the cosmos. The lost builders stand at the beginning of that chain, their identities obscured by time, but their influence unmistakable in every sacred landscape that followed. We see their fingerprints in the Adina's early mounds, simple in form yet symbolically rich. We see them in the Hopewell's geometric precision, a mastery of astronomy and engineering unparalleled in the ancient world. We see them in Cahokia's monumental plazas and woodhenge alignments, where thousands gathered to witness the turning of seasons. And we see them most vividly in the Serpent Mound, its cosmic coils still capturing the sun's movements as faithfully as they did 1,000 years ago. These structures are not isolated achievements. They are chapters in a story that began long before recorded history. What makes the lost builders truly extraordinary is not merely what they created, but how their legacy endured. They lived in a world shaped by cataclysmic forces, glaciers advancing and retreating, firestorms sweeping across prairies, floods carving new rivers, and climate shifts overturning ecosystems. They adapted to each challenge, preserving knowledge not through writing but through ritual, story, and monumental symbolism. When their landscapes were destroyed, they rebuilt. When their traditions fractured, they stitched them together anew. When their world changed beyond recognition, they found meaning in the cycles of the sky, solstices, equinoxes, lunar rhythms, patterns that remained constant even as the earth transformed. This resilience explains why skywatching became the core of so many ancient American cultures. By observing the heavens, the lost builders and their descendants anchored themselves in a universe of order amidst terrestrial chaos. The sky became both compass and calendar, teacher and warning. Alignments carved into earthworks were not acts of superstition, but acts of survival. They encoded lessons learned during cataclysm, preserved so future generations could anticipate changes, mark seasons, and maintain balance with forces beyond human control. And yet, for all their wisdom, the lost builders left no written account of who they were. Their identity must be reconstructed from fragments, buried mounds, submerged settlements, ancient DNA, distant oral traditions, and the geometric signatures of their monuments. But perhaps that is the point. Their legacy was not meant to be preserved in stone tablets or scrolls. It was meant to be lived embodied and renewed through practice. The earth itself became their library, their scripture, their memory. Today, as LiDAR reveals hidden structures beneath forest canopies and sonar uncovers submerged landscapes below the Great Lakes, we stand at the threshold of rediscovering their world. New technologies peel back layers of time, exposing ceremonial centers older than any previously known. Each discovery draws us closer to understanding the continent's deep past and closer to recognizing the ingenuity of the people who shaped it. The lost builders were not primitive wanderers. They were astronomers, engineers, philosophers, and storytellers whose worldview shaped North America for thousands of years. But perhaps the greatest lesson they offer is one of continuity. Though their names are lost, their influence lives on in the traditions of indigenous nations whose ancestors inherited and preserved this ancient knowledge. It survives in star lore, in migration stories, in solstice ceremonies, in songs honoring the earth and sky. These living traditions are not relics. They are the final, unbroken threads connecting modern peoples to the ancient architects who first molded the land. As we close this documentary, a final realization emerges. The lost builders are not a mystery to be solved, but a legacy to be honored. They remind us that civilization is not defined by writing or stone cities, but by the ability to adapt, innovate, and encode meaning into the world. They show us that knowledge can endure across cataclysm, that memory can survive beneath soil and water, and that the human desire to understand the universe is as old as humanity itself. And perhaps most importantly, they leave behind a question that will guide future discoveries, one that hangs over every buried site, every forgotten landscape, every unexplored shoreline. If this is what survived, what have we yet to find?